In anticipation of the April 12th release of Dark Souls 3 in North America, some of my friends have asked me to explain what exactly happened in the first two games. Now, this is no easy feat. Dark Souls' narrative, while incredibly rich, is intentionally contradictory, non-linear, and vague. But that doesn't stop many of us from trying to tell you this game's story. What follows is my interpretation of the Dark Souls lore. I hope that it will provide you some perspective as you make your pilgrimage to the lands of Dark Souls 3. In order to understand Dark Souls' story, you must first understand the world in which it takes place. In the beginning, the world of Dark Souls was formless and unchanging. Shrouded in a deep fog, it was inhabited only by the everlasting dragons, immortal beings who made their home amongst the arch trees. These dragons were likely quiet and still, unconcerned with the passage of time, not fueled by pride, vanity, or desire as we mortals are. This was the Age of Ancients. But then, for reasons unknown, a fire was kindled. Deep beneath the unchanging ground, the fire created disparity in the world. It created heat and cold, light and dark, and life and death. In Dark Souls, these concepts are two sides of the same coin, for one cannot exist without the other. In Dark Souls, the opposite of life is not death, but immortality. It is said that beings that lay in the dark were drawn to the fire, and they were rewarded for their curiosity. In the fire, they found 4 powerful souls and took them for themselves. In doing so, they removed the fire's fuel, and without knowing it, they sealed their fate. 4 distinct beings became vessel for the Lord Souls and became lords in their own right. 3 of these lords waged war upon the everlasting dragons. The first, Nito, came to be known as the first of the undead, harbinger of merciful death and disease. The second, the Witch of Izalith, had 7 daughters. They revered the flame and were able to wield powerful flame sorceries. The third, Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, came to be known as the Warrior Lord, and he amassed a great army of silver knights. With the help of a scaleless dragon known as Seath, the lords learned that the everlasting dragon's scales were the source of their immortality. Gwyn thus peeled away their scales with bolts of lightning, and Nito unleashed a wave of death and disease that permeated their exposed flesh. The Witch of Izalith then destroyed the arch trees, and the everlasting dragons ruled no more. And so began the Age of Fire. But there was a 4th lord, who is easily forgotten. Legend has it that in the midst of the chaos, a furtive pygmy found the dark soul in the fire. Meek by nature, the pygmy kept his powers secret from the other lords. He fractured his soul into pieces instead of harnessing its power. In the game, the pieces of the dark soul are called humanity. The Dark Soul is thus the progenitor of humanity, and the furtive pygmy is the ancestor of all mankind. And so, the story of Dark Souls is the story of those who bear these pieces of the Dark Soul. It is the story of humanity. In the Age of Fire, the Lords of Light prospered. Gwyn built the heavenly kingdom of Anor Londo and conceived a beautiful daughter and 2 gifted sons. He expanded his influence even further by bequeathing a piece of his Lord Soul to 4 great men who would rule over the vibrant kingdom of New Londo. Gwyn also rewarded Seath for his treason by giving him a dukedom and a piece of the Lord Soul. Seath would use his power to conduct research on sorcery as he sought a cure for his mortality. The Witch of Izalith created a kingdom equally impressive in the depths, with her 7 daughters and 1 son by her side. Nito happily ruled over a labyrinth of catacombs and found ways to spread death and disease. But over time, the fire began to fade. There are those who say that this was to be the dawn of a new era, the Age of Dark, or the Age of Man. But the Lords of Light feared the dark. Their fear drove them to a series of acts which would have dire consequences for the balance of nature and the fate of mankind. Through her mastery of flame sorceries, the Witch of Izalith attempted to recreate the first flame. She was unable to control its power. The fire consumed her and her daughters, and their ashes gave birth to the first demons, twisted forms of artificial life. After her failure, Lord Gwyn was left to fight a war against the dark alone on many fronts, suffering profound losses. He sent his silver knights to fight the witch's demons, though they failed to stop the scourge, and their armor was charred black by the twisted flames. Then came news of the corruption plaguing Ulasil, a pacifist town home to humble light sorceries. The people of Ulasil, it seems, had been coerced to overturn the grave of a primeval man, a man drenched in the power of the dark soul. This awoken beast, called Manus, became known as the Father of the Abyss, as from his soul emanated a cavernous darkness which consumed all it touched. Gwyn sent his bravest knight, Sir Artorius, to walk the abyss and destroy Manus, but Artorius failed. He became corrupted by the dark, and became a servant to that which he was sent to conquer. And the spreading of the dark would not be abated. Gwyn's kings of New Londo were also seduced, embracing the abyss. They championed an army of dark race, twisted knights trained in the art of life drain, a dark technique which allows the wielder to sap the humanity from even the most devoted saint. It seems as though these kings sought to amass the pieces of the dark soul in order to harness their power. In order to quell the spread of the dark, the decision was made to flood New Londo, a necessary but horrific act which would destroy the kingdom and its people. It seemed as though the Age of the Dark was inevitable, and so, in a final attempt to extend the Age of Fire, Gwyn made the ultimate sacrifice. He traveled to the first flame and offered his soul as fuel in the first rite of kindling. The fire consumed Gwyn as it fed on his soul, and the Lord of Sunlight was no more, reduced to a martyr who would be known as the Lord of Cinder. There are those who refer to Gwyn's linking of the fire as the first sin. For through his sacrifice, Gwyn had cheated fate and disrupted the balance of nature, and his act had profound consequences for mankind, for with the linking of the fire came the curse of the undead. Those afflicted with the curse, those branded by the dark sign, were unable to die human. Upon each death they would be reincarnated, slowly losing their memory and sense of purpose until they became hollow and died as an empty husk. Mankind was rightly frightened by this horrific fate. The process of hollowing would turn men and women hostile to all living things. They were hunted by powerful churches and exiled to asylums, though they would not always be overpowered. There were some undead who fought the curse and found ways to hold on to their humanity. Some discovered that special bonfires kindled by the bones of men could be used to heal them. These fires were tended to by an order known as the Firekeepers, generally beautiful women who aided the undead on their journey. The undead devised methods of bottling the essence of fire for their long journeys, and this healing tonic came to be known as Estus. Though their transient immortality was a curse, it also made the undead powerful, for they were able to fight enemies hundreds of times before hollowing, learning their weaknesses and toppling them through sheer perseverance. So now, finally, after all that, we get to the game. In Dark Souls, you begin your journey as an undead locked in an asylum. With the help of another undead, you escape and make the pilgrimage to the land of Lordran, the land of Gwyn, Nito, and the Witch of Izalith, the land of ancient lords. In the talons of a crow, you travel to Firelink Shrine, an eerie yet peaceful sight where, unbeknownst to you, Gwyn linked the first flame. You are given no instructions other than to ring the 2 bells of awakening, and so you begin your journey, guided by bonfires, suffering countless deaths and yet never truly dying. Throughout the game, it becomes more and more clear that you're being tested. After you ring the 2 bells of awakening and traverse through this maze-like fortress called Sun's Fortress, you are brought by winged messengers to Gwyn's long-abandoned Anor Londo, as if this was his plan all along, to test these undead characters. After proving yourself worthy to 2 of Gwyn's champions, you obtain a lord vessel from his daughter. A primordial serpent called Frampt in Firelink Shrine tells you that this is your destiny, chosen undead, to gather the lord souls and satiate the lord vessel, thereby opening the door to the kiln of the first flame. You are to succeed Gwyn, whose ability to fuel the fire is fading, and use your power to extend the Age of Fire once more. And so, in the game, you defeat difficult bosses, the remains of Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and you claim their lord souls. You also gather pieces of Gwyn's soul from Seath and the 4 kings. You also travel back in time to Ulasil and defeat Manus, the Father of the Abyss. This becomes very important in Dark Souls 2, but is not overly important in Dark Souls 1. It was a piece of DLC. But in the Abyss, another primordial serpent lies waiting for you. He contradicts Frampt, claiming that your destiny is not to link the fire, but to defeat Gwyn and let the fire fade, to usher in the Age of Dark, the Age of Man. It is this serpent who is rumored to have seduced the 4 kings and coerced the residents of Ulasil to embrace the dark. And so, once you defeat Gwyn in the Kiln of the First Flame at the end of Dark Souls, after you defeated all the other bosses and gathered the Lord Souls for the Lord Vessel, you have a choice to either link the flame or walk away from it, letting it fade and ushering in the Age of Dark. Due to the nature of Dark Souls, there is no good ending, no canon ending. For light can never vanquish dark, nor dark light. One just cannot exist without the other, and so they are destined to war eternally in this unending cycle. As we discover in Dark Souls 2, your choice ultimately holds no relevance. Cycles play an important role in Dark Souls 2. In the game, we discovered that it is of very little consequence whether we as the protagonist chose to link the flame or to walk away from it in Dark Souls. Regardless of our choice, many kingdoms have risen and fallen on the land of Lordran, all completing the cycle started by Gwyn's first sin. The fire is kindled, the fire begins to fade, and man is cursed. A new champion arises to sacrifice himself to the flame and kindle the flame anew. This happens over and over again. The player character is an undead from a foreign land who, in seeking a cure to the curse, is drawn to Drangleic, the land where it originated. Nito, the Witch of Izalith, Gwyn, and Seath from the first game, though they are kind of reincarnated in different bosses in this game, they are still the same souls. They're still exerting an influence on the land. Upon arrival to Drangleic, the undead player is greeted by the last remaining Firekeeper. She tells the player to gather powerful souls in order to seek the ruler of the land, King Vendrick. Drangleic, as it turns out, was once ruled by the mighty Vendrick and his beautiful queen Nashandra. Nashandra arrived from a distant land and captured the soul of her king. She warned Vendrick of the impending threat posed by the giants, and so he journeyed across the sea to wage war with them, and stole the source of their power. Something, we're not quite sure what, which allowed him to reanimate giant golems and construct a great castle in honor to his queen. But the giants were unforgiving, and they journeyed to Drangleic to destroy the kingdom and take back what Vendrick stole. Though the giant king was eventually defeated by a hero who turns out to be the player character, who goes back in time, Drangleic was destroyed, a ruin of its former glory. Around the same time, the curse of the undead began, prompted by the fading of the flame. Vendrick and his brother Aldia, like Gwyn, began searching for solutions to their undead problem. Vendrick, a man of action, organized great undead hunts and built a large bastille in which to jail them. Aldia, a man of intellect, began conducting experiments on giants and dragons, eventually creating a woman who was part dragon. Aldia and Vendrick believed that this woman could be an immortal firekeeper, tending to the flame forever and banishing the spreading dark. But the experiment failed, and this firekeeper, our own Emerald Herald, could not keep the fire kindled forever. In order to fulfill her duty, she instead urges the undead to become the next monarch, and to succeed Vendrick by linking the flame. And so, as per her instruction, we gather these 4 Lord Souls, and are then deemed worthy to make the journey to Drangleic Castle without really knowing why. Here, we discover from Queen Nashandra that the king has fled and locked himself away in the catacombs. Like the Emerald Herald, she urges us to seek Vendrick in order to succeed him and become the next monarch. Though, she likely has different reasons. Why has Vendrick fled? Faced with the unenviable choice to either link the flame or usher in the Age of Darkness, Vendrick crumbled and chose to become hollow. On his person, he took the King's Ring, a ring without which access to the Kiln of the First Flame, known in Drangleic as the Throne of Want, is impossible. In his hollow state, he seems to have forgotten his goal, and we are able to easily pluck the ring from his disheveled robes. But before we are able to ascend to the throne, we are confronted by the final boss of Dark Souls 2, Nashandra. Queen Nashandra is revealed to be the smallest piece of Manus' soul, who the player character destroyed in Dark Souls 1. The soul grew hungry for power, and she manipulated King Vendrick and the player character into giving her all she needs to ascend to the Throne of Want, presumably so she could make the choice to let the fire fade and become the next Dark Lord. But we defeat Nashandra, and the choice is left up to the player character. Well, okay, until they added the DLC, and then we have to fight another final boss, Lord Aldia, King Vendrick's brother. And was revealed to be the Scholar of the First Sin, a scholar who has researched what happened with Gwyn and the linking of the fire and is trying to find a way to get out of this cycle. Aldia confirms to us what we already knew from Dark Souls, that there are only two paths at the end of the game, that of light and that of dark, but he also suggests that there might be another way, another solution, and this is probably, in his understanding, immortality. Aldia presents us with an alternative choice, essentially leaving the Kiln of the First Flame, not doing anything and trying to find another answer. Ultimately, understanding the narrative will not be crucial to your enjoyment of Dark Souls 3. The narrative of Dark Souls is complex and mostly hidden, and you can play the game several times without paying attention to it at all. But understanding the interplay between light and dark, heat and cold, and life and death that form the foundation of these games, understanding the origins of life and the inevitable fading of the flame and Gwyn's first sin, understanding that the curse of the undead has plagued man for generations, and that bonfires provide the undead with healing and hope, and that Lords of Cinder are those who at one time sacrificed themselves to the first flame to extend the Age of Fire. All of this will aid you in your journey. I've played about 3/4 of Dark Souls 3 so far, and I can assure you, your journey will be a great one.